Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming back again. And we're on Ken Shoulders number 24. And this paper, permitatively, permitative transitions, am I saying that right, Chip?
Primitivity
Permittivity.
transitions.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This,
yeah,
this
permittivity. Yeah,
permittivity transitions, this is probably the best paper, I think, that of all the papers from Ken Shoulders. Now, one thing about it is it's quite long. It's 18 pages long. So we're going to do half of it this week, and then we're going to do the other half next week. And I'm going to read some of it, and then Brendan's going to do the rest. Again, this is from information that came from Chris Beskar, the CEO of Stevati Aerospace, who I talked to yesterday, and he told me that he did a conference in Las Vegas. I think it was last weekend or last week sometime. And it sounds like he might have got funding for his SM-39 Razor plane, which is actually going to be the world's fastest jet. So he talked about that with me, and I'm hoping to get him back for another interview. He said he's got another announcement to make as well. It might have something to do with funding. I'm not sure, but thanks for all the information, Chris. And the other thing is this week, I think because David Wilcock and Chris were together in Las Vegas, I think they must have talked because David Wilcock actually watched the Stevati presentation that we did, the last one interview we had with Chris Beskar, and he commented on YouTube about it and stuff. So it's great, and thanks again, David. Okay, so with further ado, I'm going to get into permittivity transitions. Highly organized, micro-sized clusters of electrons, or EVs, having soliton behavior with electron populations on the order of Agravato's number are represented as the necessary function for modifying the permittivity of space in a downward direction. There's the most important part, permittivity of space in a downward direction. The state of existence for this entity reduces its expressed charge by many orders of magnitude below that calculated for the same number and volume of uncontained electrons. And I believe the ratio is about 1,000 to 1, if I remember correctly. The EV is shown to exist in at least two distinct modes of charge masking, with one of them, the black EV, being virtually undetectable using sensitive methods. A form of inertial propulsion will be discussed that arises from the inertial rectification effects available by modulating the state of the EV, thereby the permittivity of space and the
Committant. Concomitant.
concomitant inertia or effective mass of material moving through space. It will be shown that the same type of permittivity change through the EV modulation can achieve a unidirectional current flow, and this gives rise to, for methods generating monopole effects and vector potentials, useful communication outside the usual current loops generating them. Okay, so that generating monopoles and vector potentials is very, very important. Consideration must be given to a form of pseudo-particle entanglement rising from the tight and pseudo-quantized coupling between the EV structures. Complex organisms are composed entirely of EV structures that are self-formed electronic rates without using either mechanical or chemical methods. Some speculations will be made on the benefits of operating such complex entities in the regions of greatly reduced permittivity. A condensed matter dissolution technique will be shown that is capable of cold dissociation of refractory material in a low viscosity fluid. The root process for energy conversion methods resembling cold fusion are reviewed and shown to likely spring from the same EV technology capable of producing modified space permittivity. Consideration will be given to experimental methods for testing effects on time at greatly reduced levels of permittivity, and that's really interesting. We'll get to that at some point. Prologue. Many of the observations of EV phenomenon are totally without explanation. It would seem that EVs live in an entirely different and bizarre world compared to ours. I've written about many of these observations over a long period of time in a scattered fashion using various interpretations, but this writing will differ in that a single explanation will be used as the root cause for all such citations. In an attempt to draw together these observations under one roof of explanation, the cause for them will be focused on a single basic reason, even knowing that this could lead to large error in interpretation.
Interpretation.
Interpretation. The one basis to be used here for EV behavior is that the EV is able to transition between various stages or levels of space permeativity in the space it occupies. So that's really important. This capability is caused by the EV's large uncompensated charge density, which is said to modify the permittivity of space. So there it is again. That's the key to it. Nothing else I know of has such a capability. With this behavior, the EV stands alone among all other entities in our known sphere of influence. As a working method for expression, a comic book writer uses thought and drawings. A theory uses thought and arithmetic or numerology. A technician uses thought and measurements. The common ingredient in almost all works devoted to moving a field forward is thought. Very important again. The method and technology for documenting and communicating the work is the other part, and it is not nearly as important as the thoughts used. So we're back to thought here again. The quality of the work is determined principally by the quality of thought and not by the technology or methods used. Anyone using good thought in a field can be at the leading edge of it and cause the field to move forward. This is certainly the case for the experimental movement of EV field, where observational and empirical methods have put it far ahead of all other methods of working. The disadvantage in doing this is that the communication line to the other disciplines is often cut off, and the empirical worker is left stranded in every way. This disengagement is likely to occur in the case of financial support because the long and tenuous communication lines endured, often trending their way through the fantasy world of theory that usually controls financial support, produce weak support. This writing is thus an attempt to connect to all others who use different methods for viewing the same basic thoughts. The views presented here cover a range of observations, and it is important in the space afforded such a brief introduction to cover them in detail. Accordingly, much of the experimental evidence will be omitted from the discussion and postponed to another time. This gives the discussion a flimsy appearance, but is still adequate to convey sufficient data to anyone desiring continuation of a better understanding. Also, the results presented are likely to be somewhat distorted when viewed from disciplines other than those having a pragmatic, empirical, or observational basis. Nevertheless, the viewpoint used is all that the writer has, and given some tolerance, it can be useful one for moving the field forward at a greater speed in an exciting direction for some new physics. The reader should constantly keep in mind that this paper is intended to be more philosophical than scientific. The author aspires to make a case for EVs having violated one of the most sanctimonious and
Sacrosanct.
sacrosanct and immutable laws of our physical domain. To wit, they reduce the permittivity of space far below the norm of one. So that's really important. All right, observations and interpretations. Charge concentration. Clusters of pure electronic charge, known as EVs, are charge condensation or separation process, and not a charge compression process as might first appear. Because for unknown reasons, the measured number of densities is equal to Agavetto's number. The removal of positive charge during the formation process is remarkable in itself, but the EV end product is even more remarkable and produces many uncommon effects. Why is the EV so common and easy to produce is still a mystery, but it seems related to having reached an uncompensated charge density threshold in an electrical discharge, whereby a reduction to the lower energy state is stated for the ensemble of charge. This transition also relates to the change in permittivity of space occupied by the EV. These manifestations occur at three levels of organization, being plain electrons, what I call white EVs, and that's interesting, and also black EVs. To learn more about these states, please refer to Appendix 1 on page 10, which we'll do next week of this paper. In addition to the usual negative charge states produced, there are occasions where charges unite and follow the same basic laws of an EV, but showing the effect of having an opposite charge. More will be said about this later. Since permittivity, also referred to as a dielectric constant, so this is really important, you guys. The dielectric constant is the permittivity. So since permittivity, also referred to as a dielectric constant, is a measure of the ability of a material to resist the formation of an electrical field within it, it would only seem natural for a mobile and charged substance to leave the medium of a higher permittivity for a lower one in order to lower the stress in the medium. The critical charge density in space would permit sufficient mobility to execute this maneuver, whereas a small number is controlled by the medium to maintain status quo. A low permittivity gives a high internal field for an EV, so very important again, but low in our medium where the EV is shielded by our high normal permittivity. So they're saying when it's in that EV mode, it's
Yeah.
actually shielded
Anyway, I'm
from
on a call.
outside. In this new medium, surrounded by more refractory one to charge, one would expect surface tension effects to give spherical shapes like those shown in Figure 1, 2, and 3, which are all pictures of the 1 and 2 are actual pictures of the EVs, and 3 taken from Figure 3 Figure 3-6, Figure 3-7, and Reference 1. These are images of a witness plate that captured the EV in flight and destroyed it. So he's talking about the Figure 3 there. And the other two can actually show the EVs. If had not been for the strong forces at work, another morphology might have occurred, but at least the basic spherical shapes implied give some signs of being subject to surface tension forces. These images are common to all witness plate strikes. Using this surface plate tension analogy, an EV can be considered as regions of low permittivity bubbles, very important again, immersed in a high permittivity medium, and no one need look further into toric or other motion forms of electrons within an EV. However, unlike this conjecture is, perhaps the contained electron just sits there without motion, which I don't think is right. I think it's moving. We just don't know. What we do know, there's a narrow band of electron energy emitted from a white EV at 2 kilovolts. This could arise from either the potential differences in the states of the EV's existence at different permittivity states, or from the retained velocities of EVs forming the electrons forming the EVs. Superfluidity and high Reynolds numbers. The number of coupled states between two modes can define both resistivity and viscosity. If there are no states to couple energy into, there is no loss of energy. Superconductivity and the low viscosity of superfluidity, having the high Reynolds numbers arise from this decision. The black EV seems to lack states to couple into our region of normal permittivity, or a form of superconductivity exists here. The state of existence from or for a black EVO bounded by high permittivity state producing a shielding effect. Within this cocoon, the black EVO slides around with ease. Inertial propulsion. Inertial propulsion is an accepted term to use when there is no mass thrown overboard, as there is with rocket propulsion. The term still allows mass to be thrown around a loop in an inertial fashion and have the mass modified in half of the loop. And have the mass modified in half the loop. This is really interesting. This is probably where the technology is. With the unusual properties of the EV, there is a method we will be using during most of this discussion. But before going into that method, there is another form of propulsion seen in EV technology that appears to be more static or more force-like in nature. Please refer to Figure 4, taken from reference 1 as Figure 328. The photo shows an image of an EV in flight taken with a special form of particle-sensitive camera. The origin of the EV is located at the center of the photo, and the camera is looking directly into the EV source. This forward view shows the flight follows a zigzag pattern or path until it finally explodes near the top of the photo. This explosion is typical of a highly excited EV in vacuum. The photo shows some extremely short turns that are not caused by applied fields within the apparatus, as the time for the turn is less than 1 picosecond, and such fields cannot be generated in the apparatus used. These turns stem from forces within the EV itself, and there are several other photos in the same reference 1 showing similar effects. There are no mass ejection or photonic effects recorded in any of these traces, but that would point to conventional rocket-like propulsion. In addition, the energy level of the EV both before and after the event is equal, even though a large amount of energy would seem necessary for the abrupt turns. The basic definition of charge is related to the force produced between charges. In other words, the coupling between charged objects controls the force. In Appendix 1 on page 10, which we'll look at tomorrow or next week, there are some discussion of how the charge reduction seen in the EV relates to permittivity. One notion that arises from the discussion is that the non-uniform charge distribution on the entity gives an asymmetrical coupling or kind of force that can be momentarily seen as thrust without ejecting matter. And I'd have to say that asymmetrical coupling that he's talking about he's right on the money right there. It would appear that by arguments of symmetry, there would be tendency to equilibrate the structure through internal movement and remove this asymmetry. This is often an uniform periodical, is that right? Periodicity, thank you, to the deflections produced as if an internal wave action was at work causing the initial stress. An entirely different type of inertial thrust producing method, and this part is really interesting. Say in an entirely different method of internal thrust producing method.
Inertial thrust.
Inertial thrust, yeah, producing method. White and black EVOs are put in a loop driven by RF, which is radio frequencies, whereby the mass of the EV is modulated between a high mass of or white state where momentum can be effective in thrusting in only one direction, and the black state having no measurable inertial mass due to its lack of measurable charge, operates to return the EV to the loop beginning. So this is a sounds like a technology totally. These notions have been briefly summarized and are attached as Appendix 2 on page 11 of this paper. The experiments outlined would also be the first tests of a sustained orbiting for the EVs, as well as a test for the black um, state lifetime. And that's something that we really want to study, is the black and the white, and know the differences between the two. In order to develop some reality about the appearance of white and black EVs, refer to Figure 5 and Figure 6, with each of them showing a single run of an EV towards a target at the top of the photo. These photos were taken from uh, Figure 440 and 442, where there is other photos showing similar effects. What can be seen is that the white EV coming in from the lower side of the photo and then disappearing from the camera view just below, striking the target and disintegrating it. The white glob at the top is a plume of ions caused or coming from the explosion. This can be validated by applying an analyzing field in the camera that produces a deflection to the left for ions and to the right for electrons, and that's pretty interesting. I might have to try that. This analysis field has been applied in Figure 6 and can be seen that the white EV has moved to the right significantly its emission products are electrons, while the ion plume moves to the left. So yeah, electrons to the right, ions to the left. The fact is there is an omission of both electronic and optical traces during the black phase of the EV run. So again, the black runs are something we really need to study. This is not an artifact of the measurement method, because there are many examples where multiple cameras and visual observations showed such a disappearance. In the black state, there is no ability to ionize gas or to excite fluorescence from the nearby dielectric materials, where there is
with
with a white EV. Aside as an aside, the question of fractional electronic charge becomes moot under the conditions discussed here. Although there are too many electrons in the process to determine the single electron level for quantum check, it appears that there are many states of charge expressed as the transition from white to black is made. Some of these can be fractional charges in appearance. There are no obvious consequences of this artifact. And when he says many states of charge expression from the transition to white to black, I would say that these are states, gray states, essentially. Um, Unidirectional current flow. Under the
you.
condition of
I think that's
white, oh,
unidirectional
sorry,
unidirectional
sorry,
current flow.
unidirectional current flow. Under the conditions of white and black EV loops, as stated above, there is an electrical per-
Peculiarity.
peculiarity, thank you, worth noting. The current flows in only the white EV direction, thus giving the basic conditions for magnetic field generation without closing the current loop. The return charge flows around the other half of the loop without being registered in our instruments. This might be the basis for predicting something like a magnetic monopole. And again, bingo, like that is almost the most important thing right there, because that's what it truly is. Under the conditions stated, it is possible to deflect the vector potential A outside of the current loop, usually used to define the vector potential habitat. This offers a communication method that is not shielded by conventional conductors, because the electron because the electrons in the conductors are not excited into generating a mirror image. One must wonder what other electrons we are working with are also not excited by this unusual method of generating longitudinal emulations or potentials. Mass reduction. All right. Mass reduction. There have been given many attempts by others in the past to measure the effect of gravity on both charged and neutral particles. These attempts have not met with much success because they usually involve measurement of particles at low velocity, where their cross-section for scattering by other particles is very large. In addition, charged particles are seemingly interested in everything else except but gravity. Interesting. This condition is likely to be exacerbated if tests were done on EVs, and it does not sound like a good way to spend one's time. However, there is some hope of concealing the expression of external,
Cancelling.
canceling the expression of external charge by combining both positive and negative EV structures. More will be said about the positive entities in the following sections on organisms. Although tests of the effect on an EV by gravity are difficult, the tests for inertial effects are much easier. In a paper given at the Conference of Future Energy, the author showed high jet velocities for materials like silicon carbide that have been fluidized without heating. The passage of an EV through the refractory material composes it into atomic form and imparts a high velocity to it. The material was accelerated significantly to generate light,
Efficiently.
sufficiently to generate light upon reverse of the direction of its travel. The light generated extends into the ultraviolet region of the spectrum and had a spherical source size of about 5 microns. Another
Peculiarity.
peculiarity of the light source is that it is almost aligned in the same direction of the borehole with the material made by the EV passage. Although the sides of the uh, borehole were both black and bound together by a low melting wax, there was no melting due to photon absorption,
Option.
yet, even though there were over 100 billion photons generated in less than 10 picoseconds. In the reference stated above, it was stated that the light was possibly generated by synchronous radiation, but there is another interpretation now available. And this is, I think he's right on the money here again. It is possible that the combination of high particle velocity and sudden transversal across the boundary of changing permittivity could give rise to Bremstrom
Bremsstrahlung.
Bremsstrahlung radiation due to the change in index of refraction or permittivity. And I've got that highly underlined on my paper. In an interpretation of these results, the quantity of mass of the material involved moves at much higher velocities than could be accounted for by the energies used. The above writing also cites a reference to work done with short, low-powered laser pulses where the energy levels of fusion, very important, of fusion for atomic clusters were reached. The clustering action seems to be needed for both the laser method and the EV method, so that's kind of important too. So I think I'm gonna let Brandon take over from here.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to start now. Complex entanglement. In many of the EV questions that have come up to date, there is always the thought that they seem to have desirable properties for experiments along the line of quantum entanglement. There are photos of dual EVs shown in figure 7 that have been taken from two, and more complex behavior shown in figure 8 there. taken from one, so that's reference one, as in figure 414. All of this attests to the tightly bound nature of the entities. In the case of the dual EVs, they remain together even though they are boring through solid silicon carbide. The quickest way to separate them is to impact them upon a metal target. The slow death method is by injecting them into vacuum and let them untangle. An example of this is shown in figure 8. So that's figure 8 there. Dual EV decomposing during vacuum run.
Very cool picture.
Figure 8 taken from reference 1. Let me just quickly go to the bottom and see if the references are at the bottom. No, they're not. Let me just go back to.
They might, Brendan. They might be on the other pages that we haven't had.
Right, so
like next week.
Taken from 1. This is a side view taken with the particle camera, where the EV source is located at the bottom of the photo, showing the EV launched into vacuum. So I think it's talking about figure 8 here.
Yep.
The helix shown represents a gradual unwrapping of the dual EV ensemble. The total distance of travel is about 1 millimeter.
Maybe you can show that picture one more time, because that's really, really awesome picture. You can see how they spiral around each other, right? Very cool.
Okay. The main question arising here is whether or not this EV coupling produces any of the interesting results shown in quantum entanglement experiments done by others. One might also ask if there is anything like pseudo-entanglement effects being pseudo-quantized, as EVs have a distinct quantized size spectrum. There is a partial experimental answer to this question by abstracting from page 2 to 18 of reference 1. The setup used in this early experiment was to place 2 microscope slides with their faces spaced about 5 micrometers apart. When an EV is shot into the crack between the slides, it is seen to split into many channels and run for a distance of about a quarter of an inch before emerging into a space with only one surface. Upon reaching the open space where there is no confinement causing it to split, the EV reunites into one streak, having the original shape. This indicates a very high degree of coupling of some kind and a liking for the original order. Attempts were made to electromagnetically isolate the separate streamers, but the small individual streamers persisted in doing the same regrouping. Having previously discussed the vector potential effects under the heading unidirectional current flow, one wonders if a coupling other than standard electromagnetics is at work here. There are undoubtedly many EV states available in the above cited experiment that are not visible to us, and it is possible that some of these states could be operating partly in a low permittivity region, and partly in a normal permittivity state. Not knowing which world we are operating in complicates matters greatly, but opens the door to additional variables with potentially interesting results. Organisms. When one views the complexity with which EVs can arrange themselves, it engenders visions of complex electronic systems that manufacture themselves at electronic states. Figure 1, 2, and 3 are examples taken from reference 1. Figure 3.3, 3.6, and figure 3.7, showing some of the complexities possible. In many cases, the number of EV beads involved reach into the hundreds, even in experiments seeking simplicity in structure. Although very little work has been done on organizing EVs into useful structures, they are constantly trying to do so without constructive guidance. The experimental method needed here is the RF radio frequency circulation technique applied to patterned templates, showing the doorway to proper continued organization. Variations on the apparatus discussed in Appendix 2 on page 11 are the basic apparatus with which to conduct these experiments. Some of the things one might find interesting to self-organize with EVs are mentioned in the writing named Genus 2, incorporated in this paper as Appendix 3 on page 14. This writing contemplates complete structures capable of emulating what one might call life and exceeding our present form of life in most ways.
Wow, that's quite the sentence there.
One of the things not mentioned is the likelihood of forming totally black organizations with ghostly properties and being able to operate without being able to see them in any presently available way. One of the things that might be needed in constructing such an entity was the EV structure. Figure 9, which is this one here, taken from reference 1, figure 454, shows an image of an early positive structure accidentally captured while looking for something else. Test for whether a structure is positive or negative is by using electrostatic deflection of the emitted particles from the entity being viewed. When a trace is deflected to the left, particles are positive. Electrons deflect to the right. In the photo, the camera is looking at the end of a small capillary tube that had an electrical discharge emanating from it, producing the image. The small spot at the top center is either high, small spot at the top center, small spot at the top center. That.
There's a bit of noise, maybe. Oh, there we go. It's off. Okay, good.
The small spot at the top center is that spot there. Is either high energy photons or high velocity neutral particles. The white pattern on the right is a group of largely disorganized electrons, while the pattern on the left is both disorganized and organized positive particles. The trail leading from the center of the plume is typical of a negative EV trace, but this one is positive and emits positive particles. Overall suggestion here is that once one operates in a region of low permittivity, it is probably better not to return to a higher value because performance will be adversely affected. Dissolution of matter. When an EV passes through material, particularly refractory dielectrics and semiconductors, nothing escapes major modification. Many of these effects are shown in reference to. Once the EV has exotic vacuum object, once the EV has disheveled the electronic structure of the material it traverses, there is no ability to return to the original molecular or structural state. It is most likely that the material undergoing modification has entered the region of low permittivity. When it does return, it emits light, has an electrified look, and spreads on surfaces with a very low viscosity. Although it is so cold, it will not melt wax or harm photographic emulsion. In a paper given on low energy nuclear reactions, reference 4, authors show examples of nuclear transmutation produced by EV bombardment. The process is not very efficient, as the basic mechanism is still unknown and has not been optimized. The low efficiency is likely due to a multi-step process involving shock wave interaction between rare dual EVs. This interaction could be going on at a reduced levels of permittivity and will permit nuclear reactions not available at the higher levels normally occupied and usually studied.
That's a pretty important sentence there, too. Very important.
Energy production. Energy is not likely to be produced as much as it is converted from one state to another. From the author's viewpoint, there are primarily two methods for performing this conversion with EVs. These are thermal and electrical. After working for a long time on both methods, there are some sage comments to offer, but no final solution in the form of a working machine or validate any one solution. The thermal processes encountered thus far all produce disruption of the materials used during the process. No satisfactory engineering solution has been found to preserve or economically rebuild these materials through laboratory examples of processes with good thermal yield have been studied. EV action on material has been found by the author to be the root process for all forms of what is commonly called cold fusion. Whether it occurs by electrolysis, ultrasonic processing, or gas discharge, reference 4, in every case of reasonable efficiency, EV must interact with a material having the nature of a semiconductor. The EV formation process is also essential. In most cold fusion methods, fractal emission of electrons from brittle material is the source of energy for this formation.
Ultra important right there.
The role of hydrogen is simply to embrittle the material and set the stage for fracture. Nuclear reactions are only a low yield byproduct of this basic process. The problem with cold fusion process understanding and control is that the interaction takes place on a very small size scale and is not amenable to either easy fabrication or inspection. The size scale is approximately 1 micrometer in total extent and has requirements for even greater detail in material handling. In fact, the structures of interest are seen by most investigators as contamination sites. The gross methods used in the technology are no match for the requirements. Electrical energy production using EVs does not necessarily destroy the energy conversion device as it does with thermal, but there are inherent disadvantages that have not been overcome in the engineering sense. These disadvantages are linked to the same limitations found in thermal energy conversion. Small size of the reaction site is very difficult to work with for either fabrication or for analysis. When energy applications are considered, they are almost always for large-scale use, and microstructures are not economical. One route out of this dilemma is to scale up EVs, but that has been tried without success. It is incumbent on the designer to wait for a good circulation process to be developed, and then we will see whether scaling up the size of the EV is best or to find yet another way to convert energy using EV circulation without using microstructures. On a philosophical basis, nonlinear transitions are universally used for energy conversion. Some cycles even use specific heat as the operator. It is possible that by invoking a changing permittivity in a particular way is such a transition that the EVs are capable of undergoing this transition where nothing else is.
Mm-hmm. Important again.
As it now stands, EVs are doing something in the way of a productive energy conversion, but there is not a good description of what the basic operating mechanism is. After testing many failed schemes for what was thought to be the source of what the energy conversion process was, the author is now willing to attribute the results to yet another source possibility and offer some form of permittivity manipulation. Only time will tell what the answer really is.
And again, this one is crazy important here, time modification.
Time modification. The writer assumes that the reader understands what was discussed earlier. We start this portion of the discussion from the basic tenet stating that a reduction in the permittivity of space is supposed to locally increase the velocity of light. Further, that time is the counting of intervals of some chosen event, usually the electronic structure of atoms, as excited and read by the mechanisms of an atomic clock. I will claim that here that these atoms immersed in a newly formed region of space will have their electronic transitions modified in accordance with the new properties of this medium, and that perhaps these spectrally shifted properties can be sensed after having crossed back into our frame of reference. To physically realize this measurement, atoms with known and easily detected optical spectra will be injected into both white and black EVs, thus subjecting them to a new dielectric constant of the space they occupy. It is assumed that since there is supposed to be a change in the velocity of light, the other connected properties will also change. The change expected here is the shift in spectral line wavelengths. If these can emerge from the encapsulated region of space, most likely the transitions into and out of the black state, then we can determine something of what is happening in that space. Time is intimately associated with the transitions to be measured, and this is a unique opportunity to see time in a different light, pun intended. The author has been able to experimentally include a large number of ions in a white EV. The species of ion is easily identified by its optical spectrum when the EV is intentionally exploded. What is needed is to transition the white EV containing ions into the black regime, and then apply a test on reemergence into a white EV state, or whatever state is needed. I've not knowingly done this because it is not a natural part of the particular project I was working on at the time. It is reported that Goff said, "We only see what we know." I am often guilty of seeing only what I am looking for, but do not yet know. It is assumed that well-known physical relations hold the permittivity hold. Sorry, I'll read that again. It is assumed that well-known physical relations hold when permittivity is reduced. The velocity of light is supposed to increase and g decrease. If this is the case, and it is true that the region occupied by the EV is one of low permittivity, then one could expect other physical constants to follow and time to proceed at an increased rate in accord with the increase in light velocity. If all the previous statements are true, then the main question becomes how to measure this. Many of the enigmatic properties of EVs can be interrogated by using probes of light. We have not been able to do this in the past using linear EV runs, but with the circulating EV systems of the future, discussed briefly in Appendix 2 on page 11, it becomes easy technology.
Yeah, and again, we need to look at that big time.
In the right runs of linear motion measurement systems used in the past, pulsed optical measurements are not feasible because of the very short dwell time of an EV in a particular location. Coupled with this, the EV launch has virtually uncontrollable launch. Sorry, I'll read that again. Coupled with this, the EV launch has a virtually uncontrollable launch time when compared to its pulse width. This condition prevents synchronous action between the arrival time of an EV with a pulsed laser beam. The use of a pulsed laser beam is made essential in the extremely low duty factor systems of the past in order to prevent scattered light from a continuous light source obscuring the information desired. As an example, the pulse repetition rate of a typical EV generator has been 1 kilohertz, while the duration of the EV in a particular optical analysis location is in the order of 10 to the minus 13 seconds. This is a duty factor of 10 to the minus 10 and is not conducive to sensible measurement without pulse synchronization. Things are far better in the circulating EV system, whereby the duty factor can be raised to something in the range of 5 times 10 to the minus 3. The high circulation rate in the range of 10 gigahertz is still within the range of good optical detectors. This allows a continuous light interrogating the circulating EV to show a chopping effect if there is either scatter or absorption of light by the EV. Under these conditions, phase-sensitive detection becomes very useful for attaining high signal-to-noise ratios. In fact, things are so good that even an ordinary incandescent lamp or monochromator could be used as a light source if the spectral purity of the laser light was not required. What is desired from measurements by light is an answer to simple questions having to do with the ability of the EV to either what does EV is it exotic
Electrovalidium, but it's the same thing as
same
EVO.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Electrovalidium or exotic vacuum object to either scatter or reflect light. In spite of the EV being composed entirely of electrons, it may not act metallic. There's always the possibility that there are absorption bands showing somewhere in either the visible light or X-ray spectrum. These questions could be answered with circulating EVs. A major question to be answered is whether or not a black EV is transparent to light. If the black state is a signature of having entered a low permittivity regime, then the answer could very likely be found by a simple optical interrogation using circulating EVs. Circulation is the gateway to many things.
Yeah, very important.
Electronic devices. A large amount of work has been done in the past on adaptations of EV structures to conventional devices. Patents have been issued to the author covering a wide range of applications, reference 5, that can emulate all known electronic devices and show great improvements. While these patents have nothing to do with the change of space permittivity, the devices shown could function even better in a region of greatly reduced permittivity instead of being forced to deal with energy storage elements like capacitors and transmission lines operating at a normal permittivity. The unique feature of a complete EV electronic system, organized somewhat along the lines described by this author long ago as a chapter in a book, reference 6, is that they are potentially capable of self-fabrication at electronic rates without either mechanical or chemical methods being used. This is discussed to some extent in Appendix 3, found on page 14. The lifetime of such systems using the black EV state is with state with its low interactivity would seem to be indefinitely long. Operation of such systems would be as ghostly as it gets, as they would transition data to a normal permittivity level only at terminals intended for our use. It would not be smart to run such systems at high permittivity, as it would only degrade the performance. They should operate in their own natural realm and not ours, submerging only to communicate needed data to us. Epilogue. It should be obvious by now that the entire writing is a plea for both financial and moral support for the cause outlined. There are sure to be many bad assumptions and outright errors in this proposal, as that is the characteristic of the type of exploratory work this is. And no apologies made here for stumbling over many things in an attempt to rush forward, as this is still the best way for rapid exploration. Although there are industrial products to be had in the future, constraints of product generation should not be applied at this early date. The work to be done also needs far more freedom than that allowed using the academic method, where maintaining status quo is the norm and rapid forward thrusts are severely damped. The method of choice is best termed princely support, as this method recalls the technique of the Renaissance period in art and science. It requires an interested and interesting person to supply funding. This person, however, connected to the world, knows whatever progress there is can be turned to advantage when the time is right. I welcome contact with such a person. Okay, that's that.
Yeah. Wow. Um, it would have been cool to have contact with Ken Shoulders himself, actually, wouldn't it? Now, I think the most important thing here is when they talk about the permittivity of space and how we alter it and how we put it down to a lower level below one. That's where these black EVOs seem to um, have their domain, essentially. Yeah. So does anyone have any comments or questions about it? It's a pretty interesting paper. And this is only half of it. We're going to do the next half next week. It was just too long for us to read through. So there's another 9 pages for next week. And some of the stuff was referring to that as well.
Yeah, do we know if Ken ever worked with infrared light or UV light while photographing these processes?
Um, I, I know that he had special cameras, but I don't know what exactly he had to work
Yeah.
with. Now, here's one thing also, guys. In the last interview that I had with Chris Beskar, he basically told us something that most people didn't know or didn't understand, that Chris Beskar was at Area 51 with Pete Peterson, but so was Ken Shoulders. He was there as well. And all of the Shoulders patents are now out in the public domain. And I do have, that was the other thing that Chris sent me, was all of Ken's patents as well. So we're going to start going through those at some point here. But this paper here is probably the pinnacle of everything. And it talks about the permittivity of space and how to change it, essentially, to get it to below one. And this is probably where the black EVO domain is again, right?
So another question I had is he had annotated a neutral particle on what I think Brendan had, like figure 2 or 3 or something. Do you remember that? I was very curious at how that could even exist within this highly high energy density region that allows for black and white EVOs to even form in the first place. How could you have a neutral particle?
I don't know that neutral particle is at that lower permittivity level though.
Yes.
Yeah, that I'm unclear of. And then of course, with last week, we went through how there's electrons, protons, and neutrons that can all be formed by these toroidal structures, essentially wheels within wheels, right?
Right.
And also what they talked about there was a counter spin. One spins one way, and then the other setup spins the other way. Well, whenever that occurs, there's a null point, and I would suggest maybe that all the magic is happening at these null points, as
Yes.
it is, right? Yeah.
Brendan, could you roll down to page 3? I think the graphic is on that page. So where's the neutral particle? Now it must be must be further down.
This one?
Yeah, it might be.
No, further down. Past page 3, yeah, just keep going. Yeah, I wanted to see, it was kind of isolated by itself, as I recall. Keep going. There we go. There's a central neutrals. What the hell is that? And there is a plasma anomaly in its direction there to the right. My God, that is very important. He glossed over it because obviously he's trying to pull this entire theory together with some,
with one.
Some extremely interesting results, and they're all interrelated. They would have to be.
Yep, absolutely.
Essential neutral. Yeah, I wonder if you looked at that in UV light, for instance, if it was a different frequency, or IR light, it was a lower frequency. I suspect there's something in the EM spectrum that would really accentuate it. I need to take a photo.
Okay, Chip. All right. Well, the other thing that is really important here, I think, where he talks about this loop. Under the conditions of white and black EV loops, as stated, there is an electrical particularity worth noting. The current flows in only the white EVO direction, thus given the basic conditions for magnetic field generation without closing the current loop. The return charge flows around the other half of the loop without being registered in our instruments. This might be the basis for predicting something like a magnetic monopole. And of course, we've talked about that before with some of the work of Bob Grenier and showed that this is what it's truly all about. That magnetic monopole is probably the pinnacle of all of this research, essentially.
And why is the magnetic monopole very important?
Because there's let's see here. Where is it? So this is all on page 4. And right at the bottom of page 4, Brendan. So under the conditions stated, it is possible to detect the vector potential A outside of the current loop, usually used to define the vector potential's habitat. This offers a communication method that is not shielded by conventional conductors because the electrons in the conductor are not excited in generating a mirror image. This is how a transformer works. So
I could ask that to ChatGPT. The question I could ask, what is important about what is why why is a
magnetic monopole important?
Magnetic monopole,
because it creates a non-radiating boundary.
Important.
It potentiates the entire.
Why is
it? Yeah, go ahead, Chip.
It potentiates the entire vacuum. It is the gut process of almost everything.
Yep.
And how you maintain their stability is the trick, right? Because they don't like to be running around by themselves.
A magnetic monopole is
Naked
important.
without any pants on, yeah.
A magnetic monopole is important because its existence would have profound implications for both theoretical physics and our understanding of the universe's fundamental forces.
Yeah. It should not exist.
Yet it does.
And yet it does.
Yeah.
And most importantly, we can create them, or we've seen them being created by quantum mechanical processes
Right.
that involve consciousness and other things. Yeah.
Yeah,
A
exactly.
magnetic
And
monopole is
back to
important.
etherons with consciousness again, right, Chip?
Yeah. And that's why they struggle with a monopole can't exist. Oh, the fuck it can't. We're looking at them.
Yep.
And you just need to dig deeper. Yeah.
Yeah.
A magnetic monopole is important because it would restore symmetry to fundamental equations, explain why electric charge is quantized, support unification theories on cosmology, deepen the grasp of topology phenomena in physics, possibly inspire future technological breakthroughs.
Basically, it's the holy grail of physics. If you want to put it in
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. I do the same thing. And I would also offer that it's probably very important in the materialization of EVs and their stability through rather lengthy periods of time, such as ball lightning or some other thing.
Yep.
You need to maintain that potential, that differentiated gradient within the vacuum to do work.
Yep.
That's why they're so critically important. They occur at a molecular level, so you can design devices with one molecule at a time if you could make yourself really small.
Yep, exactly. So again, changing it below 1 is the key here again, right?
You just torque the shit out of the vacuum as soon as we do.
Yeah.
Magic happens.
And
so another thought I had, Ed and Brennan, when we were reading through this, it would seem that he mentioned time. I just kind of threw it out there without any quantification of it, but I don't see any way of creating this potentiated gradient that allows for this higher low permittivity tug of war that exists without creating a time slip. And yes, and also then you create gravity. You just warped. You just removed yourself from flat de Sitter space. You just warped the shit out of the vacuum.
Yep.
Now you have just messed with time. As soon as you mess with time, you mess with gravity, and therefore it should be possible through GZ effects, Gerstenstein's Zeldovich effect, to create gravity through a time modification initiated by a monopole EV low permittivity region like black or white.
Yep.
That then you can harvest electricity from.
Yep. It seems like what he's getting to in this paper, for what I see, is it's that loop. If we can form that loop between a white EV and EVO and a black EVO and then back and forth again, he's basically saying this is how we're going to do it, to clutch the ether, as Ken has said in the past, to make it all work. And then of course we know that the speed of light changes within this little bubble, just like the speed of light. We have the sun has our heliosphere, and outside of the heliosphere, the speed of light is going to be different again, right? So the speed of light does vary according to the little spheres or the big spheres, whatever it may be, that it's under the influence of, right? So this is a fantastic paper, and this is only half of it, you guys. There's another half for next week as well, too. Yeah. I'm
looking at that under time modification, the bottom of the second paragraph. Right now, time is intimately associated with the transition to be measured, and this is a unique opportunity to see time in a different light, pun intended. So I would offer my gut feel right now, and this is completely shooting from the hip. I believe you're looking at a time slip fracture in a black EV. That's exactly why you don't see it. You just slipped it right out of our time realm.
Well, that's what it seems like. And black EVOs seem like they can transition through materials and do things that are just, like he says, ghostly,
Like
basically.
a soliton.
Yeah, well, they're all solitons at the end of the
Yes.
day, right? That's what everybody has to understand. That even the Turing wave, as the base level of our whole existence, is a soliton.
What
It's
I
created.
couldn't, and I absolutely agree, the soliton concept, a very nonlinear wave propagation that passes through things without messing itself up, completely stable in frequency and energy density and everything else. Yet the EV does not seem to do that. It messes with everything. It's a Klingon disruptor, for Christ's sake. It fractalizes would seemingly across a whole scale of materials and leaves a total path of destruction. Disheveled is the word he used in here.
Mhm.
But why is it, and that's what killed him. It's this goddamn, gravity B radiation that, Bob Lazar talked about in a Muscovy Manning reactor. The same thing that killed Ken Shoulders. He's generating one of these EV clusters. Why is it that the EV passes through this material, completely disrupts it at atomic level, everything, and yet it is a soliton phase transition? That would not be a soliton if it's messing with the material that dramatically.
How does
And
it
yet
relate
there's
to
a carrier wave.
how does it
There's
relate
some
to
kind.
etherons? How does the EVO and the soliton? How does the EVO relate to ele
Precisely. That's the mind
Etherons.
example.
Well,
etherons?
they all are one and the same. I even had that question of Chris on camera. I said I think that an Etheron charge cluster, although that term is probably wrong, I should have said electron. An Etheron, an electron, and ball lightning are all one and the same. And he said, yeah, you should continue that research for sure. We're on the right
Yes.
path.
So in this case, Brendan's alluding to a really good thought experiment here. The one I just stated. Why is it EV? An EV is so destructive, disheveling everything at a molecular scale, at a subatomic level. It rearranges quarks and quark spins and everything else.
Yep.
And yet it is being transmitted in the form of a soliton. Solitons do not mess with the material they pass through. They don't mess themselves up either. That's why they're so unique and act as carriers within an EMF acoustic system.
Yep.
So if we could explain, and Ken was grousing around here, and this is why he wrote it. These things were in the back of his head and he couldn't get his arms around it. That'd be a great question for Chris.
Yeah.
Explain why a Klingon disruptor here destroys the shit out of everything at a molecular scale and yet seems to move so easily through material, not affecting itself.
Yeah.
How can that be? There's a
Well,
real diachronism there. Yeah.
Realistically, again, going back to the monopole and the non-radiating boundaries and everything like that, that kind of explains it, doesn't it? Think back to that. Remember we did monopole quite a while back from the Russians' work also that had to do with Ken Shoulders.
It is absolutely in everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything I've been taking notes on in the last 3 years, monopole keeps coming up again and again.
And it's the holy grail of physics,
Yeah.
standard physics especially. But how do we connect all of this to etherons and subquantum kinetics? Because that's what this group is about, right? This is a subquantum kinetics group. It started originally by Brendan and a few other people with Paul LaViolette, right?
Sorry, Brendan. Protons, neutrons, and electrons in subquantum kinetics are solitons of etherons, trillions of etherons making up the soliton.
Yep.
And the EVOs are to do with the electrons, aren't they? They're
electrons spun up essentially, or clusters of them is what an EVO exactly is. Yeah.
So an electron or a proton in subquantum kinetics is a soliton wave pattern made up of the ether being XY for electric pole, 2 poles of electrical field, and the geons for the gravitational field.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I like that. That's your carrier wave soliton, Brendan. At
Yeah.
a very sub-quantum kinetic level, it's carrying everything. So if you could answer Richard Feynman's original question in the letter to Ken Shoulders, why in the hell is it exactly 10 to the 11th electrons does it take to hold a Coulomb, neutralize and hold a whole bunch of electrons together without scattering themselves in a repulsive force all over creation? If you could answer that question, why that very specific number is unique, and that these things move as a carrier wave motion, Turing motion of some kind, as a soliton, and yet when they pass through material are so completely and totally destructive. There's 3 or 4 counterpoints there that don't make any sense in terms of classical physics, but are very ironic, contradictory in quantum mechanics also.
The name of our group is EVOs and Consciousness Research. I was just thinking, are we touching on consciousness here? So
Well, sure we are. Yeah.
you know, in quantum theory, the observer effect, the observer affects the
I have some
particles.
equations that have it included in the equations.
So, I mean, I think there are some people who are working on trying to explain, working on mathematical formulations of consciousness, and consciousness being foundational. Are we getting to get to a point where we're having to mathematically or in some way bring consciousness in, like Paul was speculating that etherons are conscious, where we're so used to dealing with things as matter, as physical, and does it come to a point where we interface with consciousness?
Absolutely. I think I'd say yes. Absolutely. Because it all comes down to consciousness essentially, right, in the end. Yeah.
And when we say that, we suddenly a blank. We suddenly we're in touch with we're in the present moment. But I think there's one researcher who worked on neuroscience and physics and consciousness, and I can't remember his name, but he's dealing with mathematical models showing how consciousness is foundational and the material world comes out of consciousness.
Definitely. Thought is the most foundational thing. Yeah.
But anyway,
so as Ken was working with his photography and whatnot, he was influencing, the observer was affecting the observed process clearly. And that, I think, I don't recall in any of these writings that we've talked about here as Ken referring to consciousness directly. Is that true or false?
I think you might be right about that. I don't know if I've seen it yet. And we're through about half of the stuff at this point, or close to half.
That's interesting because the way he poses his problems, he allows for something he's not talking about. And it's not that something he doesn't know. There is a difference. I sense from his writings that he knows that this woo-woo factor, this consciousness
connection
is involved in his work at a fundamental level, and he doesn't talk about it because getting money for so damn important to him. I can understand. As soon as you throw woo-woo out there, then there goes the billionaire angel donators.
Yep.
That's, they're all Kabbalists. They always were, always will be. They're all, deep state jackasses. And as soon as they heard that word, the real secret of the universe, oh, no, we don't have any money for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. Well, we're still recording, so does anybody help?
Oh, we are?
Yeah, I was going to say something, but...
Yeah, we're popping off here left and right. We got too much spaghetti stuck to the wall right now.
Yeah, maybe we should stop this is a good point to stop the recording, I think, Brendan.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. I only got about 10 or 15 minutes. I got to go in about 10 or 15 minutes.
Have a wonderful rest of the week. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, and we'll be back with the second half next week.
Great. That might clarify some of the questions.
Yeah, I think it might actually.